Just to my left is Richard Abalafia, Vice President of Analysis for the Teal Group. Richard is an expert both on commercial and military aircraft and is oft-quoted in the press on a number of aircraft and aviation related issues. Fortunate to have him with us today. Jerry Aline is Vice President, Strategic Planning and Analysis with Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Began his career at Boeing in 1986, the background in electrical engineering and an MBA, and was named to his current position in July 2010. We have Philippe Poutassou next from Bombardier. He's Vice President of Marketing, has a background in engineering physics, and played a key role in the development and certification of the growing in popularity Q400. Next, we have Mr. Alan Epstein, who's Vice President for Technology and Environment with Pratt & Whitney, and is very focused on environmental impact and has a background prior to Pratt & Whitney as a professor of aeronautics and astronautics at MIT, where he currently holds the title of Professor Emeritus. And at the far end, we have Laurent Rouault, Chief Marketing Officer with GE Aviation. Began his aviation career in 1987, McDonnell Douglas in California. Has since worked at Airbus, where he began in Toulouse in 1991. And holds a master's in engineering and a PhD in economics. So quite a good panel today. And I would like to start by reading some of the framing discussion and question that Roger put together for us. I think it's a very good background on what we'll be talking about here. Aviation has long been a technological innovator. Efficiency improvements in aviation lead all other transportation modes, and there's more to come. Airplanes are changing, fleet composition is changing. Can innovations with today's state-of-the-art aircraft carry the industry into the future? Or are major breakthroughs in airframe and engine technology going to be needed in order to meet the environmental and energy efficiency challenges of the future? What are the near-term innovations? So I think I'd like to kick it off with Jerry for a moment. And I'm thinking back, and I don't remember the exact month of the announcement, but roughly 10 years ago, I believe Boeing was about to announce its decision on Sonic Cruiser versus Dreamliner and that major direction. And, you know, thinking back and now knowing what we know about the importance of fuel, could you elaborate on perhaps the wisdom of that decision and the how much it will guide your thinking going forward? Is fuel going to continue to be the major driver for airplane design?
Okay, well, wisdom is very generous, thank you. At the time, we had mixed feelings. There was a lot of belief that what the consumer wanted was spending less time in airplanes and getting there faster. And so we had a lot of research looking into technologies that could pull that off. When we actually looked into it and actually evaluated speed in the system, and the system is really looking at when the customer wants to, from wherever they are, getting to the airport, getting on the airplane, landing, the equation of where you could really take advantage of that speed was relatively small in the overall. We went out and talked to a lot of customers, and what they really came back and said, the speed is nice, but what we really want is a more efficient, better fuel burn, better airplane, in which was internally a decision to go towards a composite 8.7, which for us was a big stretch, but it brought a lot of what we think our customers are asking for.
Okay. And Philippe, representing Bombardier, do you have a similar view looking forward on what the biggest commercial drivers will be of your airframe design?
So clearly fuel is key to the airlines. As we heard on the previous panel, it's a critical cost element. These days it represents probably their largest single cost element. But beyond that, in order to thrive and grow in the environment that the airlines face today, they need to be able to have very efficient operations. And that means having families of aircraft that allow them to cover and span the entire market range that they're looking for. And that's why Bombardier, we're focused on the aircraft of less than 150 seats, because as we heard from Roger, tremendous number of communities and destinations in the system are also looking for the same types of service, whether it's at a low cost, from a low-cost carrier, or at a reasonable cost with a higher level of service as you can receive in the large centers and from the large hubs. And so what we're focused on at Bombardier is ensuring that all the technology that's available, that in many cases gets introduced on those larger aircraft flying between the very large centers, flows into the system, into our very efficient regional jets, turboprops, and now our single-aisle C-Series.
Okay, thank you. Laurent, maybe we could elaborate from the engine OEM and avionics and systems perspective on what's driving GE Aviation's thinking right now in terms of design and operations.
Yeah. Well, in terms of innovation going forward on the engine side, we believe the open rotor is certainly the way to go, the game changer in terms of getting the full entitlement to the propulsive efficiency of the Brayton cycles, and behind that, after the open rotor, it's a more a gray area where we believe at the end of the road it's an all-electric airplane. It's a zero emission type of airplanes. We don't know exactly when the time frame is going to be, but this is clearly our vision to get towards that and to develop all the technologies and the innovation to go to that road. We know pretty much where we are today, and this is where we are going. And that will be for the engine side. So you might think about down the road some on the path to an all-electric airplane, a zero-emission airplane. Down the road, some kind of an hybrid type of airplanes using the superconductive, operating in a superconductive environment. That would be the hybrid airplanes. And then you have all kind of innovations also besides the engine, which are more energy management. You have to think about it as the smart grid for the airplane, which is really making sure that we dedicate the source of the engine to the thrust and having fuel cells, having batteries, energy batteries, doing the rest, powering the systems, the hydraulics. And so that will be the smart grid, if you want. Mm-hmm. Then another innovation, which is going to be very important for us in the future, and I'm thinking about 2020 and beyond, is the idea of an information management on the airplane, which is, I call it, think about it as hyper-connected airplanes, which is going to be a system of systems combining the open avionics together with ATM, the green trajectories, the 4D FMS, the accurate 4D FMS. And the third element of that would be what we call the integrated vehicle health management, which is going to be the combination of artificial intelligence, basically, with prognostic and diagnostics on board the airplane. So that will be, think about it as hyper-connected airplanes. And then maybe another innovation going down the road, and this is now and long term, it's really the use of the digital capability on ground. So for example, it's using all the data that we have on the engines, on the airplanes, and putting analytics into it, putting cloud computing into it, and putting mobility into it. And you have seen probably My Engines, a product that we put together on the market last year, which was, the innovation, one of the top innovation of the Aviation Week for last year. So that's where we are moving, really, in terms of innovation going forward.
Okay. Alan, that's probably a good segue to thinking about the vision for the 10 years ahead and the 20-year forecast horizon that FAA has laid out for us. There was a tremendous amount of attention the last decade, of course, the A380, the 787, the larger equipment types, some splash yesterday, the day before, with the 747-8 passenger version. But some have called this, the decade we're now in, as the decade of the narrow body. And I wonder if you could elaborate on the significance of narrow body orders, design thinking in the years ahead, and all that goes into thinking about that from where you sit.
Well, you know, narrow bodies are really the heart of the industry in terms of carrying people, especially around the United States. And in the 90s, we saw that the commercial aviation was transformed with the regional jets that led to low-cost carriers. Now, as you said, we see the extremely high efficiency twin aisles coming in, the 787, the A380, the new 747. And suddenly, this decade, we have an explosion of high-tech, high-performance narrow bodies coming in, a market that was only evolutionary in the last 25 years. So you have started with the C series, and that, I think, motivated Airbus to re-engine. It motivates Boeing to keep us all on pins and needles as to what their future is. It started the Russians with Irkut, Comac, Chinese with Comac. You have countries with immense financial resources committing to narrow-body airplanes. Now, I don't think you're going to see those airplanes operating in North America in the next 10 years. But I think it's a wedge by which the more successful of them will move into the large airplane business, and I'll call a narrow body a large airplane business. It's enabled, from my point of view, from big jumps in engine technology. And engine people have been accused of no big breakthroughs. All we do is deliver, on average, 1% a year every year in fuel burn improvements. And my response to that is, what don't you understand about compound interest? We're in business for a long time. Most airlines are in business for a long time. The airplanes last for a long time. And so steady improvements are really important. And I see going forward for either narrow bodies or wide bodies that we'll be able to continue this pace for the next 10, 20, 25 years before we start to reach some hard technical limits.
Philippe, would you like to echo comments on the decade of the narrow body and the Bombardier thinking?
Well, I think Alan articulated it very well. It's a market that has seen evolution, but has not seen significant investment in new platforms. And so clearly, in the 100 to 150 seat space, where there has not been a 5 abreast aircraft developed in the last 2 decades, we see that there is an opportunity to package all the incremental benefits and the technology that's become available and to create an optimized solution. And just to build on the notion of compound interest, might be a little bit of wishful thinking on our part, but if you were to take the 1,800 airplanes that are flying in that 100 to 150 seat segment and replace them with an aircraft like the C series or with the performance of the C series, you'll actually cut the fuel bill by 32%. That's the aircraft that are out there today, the aircraft that were built in the last decade and the decade before that are still operating. So there's some very, very big gains to be made by introducing all these benefits into a single platform and optimizing it.
So I'm going to throw you a softball, Philippe, then. How serious should Airbus and narrowbody take the C series and other Bombardier platforms as a narrowbody competitor?
Well, we're obviously going to build the best airplane we can. And what that means is that by using the new materials, so aluminum lithium, using composites in our wing design, We're essentially able to take about 12,000 pounds out of an airframe and wing engine combination relative to the aircraft that are built today. Combine that with the excellent engines that Alan's going to provide us, you're going to have a very, very efficient platform. Now, we're focusing on the part of the market that we feel we can address very well, which is the next segment up from where we've been, is the 100 to 150 seat segment. So we will be a very, very strong competitor in that segment.
So talking about the gauge of the airplane is probably a good segue to me asking about your thoughts or prospects for the equipment being flown by mainline pilots versus regional pilots. What's your thinking, or what are your goals in that regard, or are you completely sort of cockpit neutral on who the operator is?
Absolutely, we are cockpit neutral in that we have a family of regional jets that's designed to allow an airline to grow from the 50-seater to the 70-seater to the 90-seater and now to the 100-seater. We're going to do the same thing with the C-Series. We're going to design a family of aircraft with nominally a 110-seater and a 130-seater. But we didn't try and maintain any commonality between our regional jet and our C-Series. Where the airlines choose to operate the aircraft and where they end up with their own agreements with their labor unions will be entirely up to the airlines. All we can do is build the most efficient aircraft, and the cost structure that it gets flown in is really up to the airlines.
Jerry, one of my favorite lines from this morning's panel was Scott Lawrence's comment, I worry about everything all the time. Encroachment by Embraer and Bombardier into the narrow-body segment further, is that something that Boeing's very focused on right now? Or?
Absolutely. It's broader than Embraer. I mean, obviously, COMAC, the Chinese, are very aggressive. They're going to be in that space. You look at other industries. I like looking at the auto industry. You look at North America. The Japanese came in and they didn't respond. Now the Koreans are starting to take share from the Japanese. So you see this cycle. When we look around the world, we see a lot of people that want to play in this space. The Russians, the Japanese, the Brazilians, Bombardier, and there's a lot of great airplanes. We spend a lot of time asking ourselves, trying to figure out what should we do, how should we compete, what products, what should our strategy be. So yeah, we do worry a lot.
Well, let me stick with you and then shift over to the wide body, Jerry. The Dreamliner seems to be selling well. You had the announcement, the 747-8. We talked about the decade of the narrow body. What should we expect? Are we looking further and looking at additional options for the movement and design of the wide body anytime soon? Or is it going to be more aggressive marketing in the 747-8 and whatnot?
I would say right now we got a lot on our plate with our existing commitments on the 87, 747, so we need to focus on getting those out, certified and delivered. In addition, we have aggressive production ramp-up challenges ahead on the 87 that we need to work through. But we will be watching very carefully as Airbus brings their A350 in. We'll be watching what we think the performance of that airplane will be and what we might need to do in the 777 space. In parallel, we have a ton of effort going on single aisle, which is a combination of will the technology, when you project out in time, get us enough of an operating benefit to make sense, or do we need to wait? Should we entertain a re-engine of the 737 to buy us time? What do our customers want? We're going around asking and getting mixed reviews from our customer base. Some are very adamant that don't change a thing on the NG. Others are saying we're kind of interested in a re-engine. So we just got to sort through that.
So Richard, you have the luxury of reading and writing about these folks and what's going on in all parts of the world. Let's stick with the wide body a bit. What's being done right? What's being done wrong? What would you like to see more of that we're not seeing yet?
Well, obviously program execution really comes to mind. I think it's pretty clear that this is where the two legacy manufacturers have stumbled, both on the design, development, and production side. What really hits me is that if you thought the narrow body ramp up, excuse me, of the past few years was really tremendous, and in a lot of ways these jets were needed, but it should be noted that narrow bodies are now at all-time high of 55% of the market by value in terms of output. These guys have even grander plans for the wide body segment. You're heading towards 10 777s a month, 10 A330s a month by late 2013 or mid 2013 or sometime around then. That means in 2014, you've got this scenario, you're doing 120 A330s, 120 777s, oh, by the way, 120 787s, because that's the, I believe, still the current ramp-up angle that's expected for the 787. 24 747s, probably 24 to 30 or something like that, A380s, and another, I think the current plan right now is 53 A350 XWBs. This is an incredible challenge, both in terms of absorbing all this capacity, what it will do to the existing wide-body fleet in terms of values and utilization and lease rates and everything like that, as well as the sheer challenge of the supply chain ramp-up. So I think if they can execute and they can do it all right, we're not going to have to worry about wide bodies. We'll have lots of them.
Okay. Let's go back to the narrow body for a moment and talk about something that's certainly been in the news and analyst reports several weeks and months. It's heated up, the debate about re-engineering versus the new platform, and let's get your thoughts on that at your global level.
You know, it's interesting. We talk about innovation in this field. Getting back to your first question, there's quite a lot of innovation, which of course Laurent and Alan did a great job of describing at the propulsion level and at the subsystems level. I'm not so sure I see it at the airframe level. There's some. I think Philippe referred to the incremental improvements that have been packaged up into the C series and make it an appealing product. But in terms of potential for new innovation, I survey the world of possible technologies that can be put into an all-new narrow body. I'm not so sure I see the value proposition relative to a re-engineering. I think Airbus is doing the right thing. I think, Jerry says, obviously they have to survey the world and look at all the customers and hear their responses, but you'll assume that it's about $3 billion to do a re-engineering, maybe $9 billion to do a all-new product. I'm not so sure I see the airframe technologies right now in the narrow body space that justify that $6 billion developmental cost premium. I just don't, maybe I lack the imagination, but I don't think we're there yet. So maybe we will be, but my tendency is still to think that we're living in a world of airframes that look an awful lot like they did back in the, well, 80s or even earlier, yet with new propulsion and new avionics. And you talk about the Irkut products and the Comac products. These two look incredibly Me Too. You look at the specifications that have been put out for the C919. They're very similar to a 1988 model A320. So I think we're kind of stalled out here, if you will, in terms of narrow body airframe technological improvements.
Jerry, tell us why Richard doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, I'm going to go back to a comment on the performance. It's compound interest as well, and I do agree with a lot of what Richard has said. What we're looking at is our challenge is we got a great airplane to start with, great market penetration, customers love it. So to replace it or to re-engine it, we've got to bring a value equation that really makes a lot of sense. So when you look at, we have some customers out there that have this airplane in a large network, and so the disruption costs are huge to an airline to bring something new in. And so in order to do that, that needs to be an increment, significant increment of performance before it even makes sense. So to Richard's point, as we look at the technologies and we say, okay, what are the engine technologies, airframe, airfoil, what are the things that we see, extrapolate out in time and says, can we see a technology boost that will create enough of a gap? And then on top of that, can we execute? Is it affordable? So those are the things that are going into the equation. So on an all new, We've publicly said we're targeting somewhere around 2019-ish. We're trying to evaluate, is it there? If it's not, the other alternative, we could stay the course and potentially re-engine. And does that get some amount of that increment? But again, what we're evaluating is we've got customers, some have a ton of passion, said don't change it. We don't want the disruption in our fleet. Others are interested and others are kind of interested, can you bring me something really attractive out there? But it's got to be a big enough jump. And that is our challenge. It's not crystal clear what all those things are that get you enough.
And is Richard right on the order of magnitude, $9 billion for the new platform versus $3 billion in investment, ballpark?
What's
a billion here and there?
Yeah, it's
Gotta ask my engine friends. New airframe, re-engining, the view from GE first.
Yeah. Well, I could not agree. I could not agree more with Richard. And I must say, Richard, this is a first for me, which is great. And you know, the rationale for the re-engine, if you look at it, there are like 3 or 4 main points in that rationale. Number one is with the recovery of the economy, fuel price already is starting to increase quite a bit, pretty close to $90 a barrel. And it's going to continue to increase as the recovery step in even further. So that's the first really rationale for it. The second one is it's a profile of the replacement. You see, when you look at the replacement market for the single aisle, there is 2 bumps. The first bump is in the area in the time frame of 15 to 18, 2015 to 2018. And then the second bump in the replacement is probably around 2023 to 25, 26. So that's a second very, very fundamental reason for the re-engine. The third one is really that there is a lot of technology out there which is going to be probably mature towards the end of the decade, or probably most likely actually within the next decade, which is going to bring a significant amount of improvement. And I stated a few of them, which is the open rotor, but it's also the smart grid and the hyper-connected aircraft that will be coming toward, you know, in the next decade. So those reasons make the re-engineering rationale a very strong rationale for the re-engineering.
Alan, compound interest, efficient to re-engine?
Well, for narrow bodies, it's Airbus is saying 15% fuel burn advantage. And I wish they were getting more for the airplane than they're going to get. In fact, one of the narrow body lessons, I think, through history is if you go back to the first narrow body, I'll call the first one the 727, and you look at the operating costs since then, they've gone down by at least 40%, which is the efficiency the airplane people and their vendors have put into the airplanes. But the actual selling price is constant dollars. So the technology and manufacturing people have created immense value. We gave it all away to our customers. So the airlines must be doing great, right? Well,
and we gave it all away to ours.
Yeah.
Well, and that's in a sense the FAA's dilemma, that immense growth in air transport demand due to creating value. So, you know, I'm glad I don't work for the Boeing company and have to make this decision, but they have to do something. 2025 is yes, I agree, you could have another kind of airplane then. It won't be an open rotor at that size, I don't think. I think the open rotor is confined to 100 seats and below, in which case it makes a great airplane. But for the noise levels for the bigger airplanes and the range, speed, I don't think it's an option. A bigger challenge is Boeing and Airbus, the whole industry has made 707s for the last 60 years. Very refined, very high value. They've squeezed an immense amount of value out of a 30, 37 degree swept wing and engines hung on pods. How much longer can you do that? Right. And what would it take for a rational investment by a commercial organization to break out of the learning curve that you have, the comfort zone you have on airplanes that have better materials, better aerodynamics, immensely improved avionics, better engines, but still are basically the same model? I don't know whether it would take a national program and a prototype sponsored like that, but I think a radically different airplane, and I put an open rotor as a radically different airplane, an electric airplane seems unlikely. The extension cords get unwieldy after a few miles. Fuel cells, UTC is the world's oldest and largest manufacturer of fuel cells. Our engines are much more efficient than our fuel cells and will continue to be. So I see the future as a hydrocarbon-powered airplane, hydrocarbon from a renewable source. The airplane, Boeing has a really difficult decision from a technical point of view, from a business point of view, from a market point of view, and different days, I wish they do different things. So I'm waiting to hear from Seattle. Every day I look to Seattle to see if there's any smoke on the horizon. Not yet, not yet.
Well, so an interesting question. Beyond Seattle, beyond Europe, the aspirational manufacturers, are we seeing more futuristic ideas in narrow-body design from China and elsewhere, other parts of the world?
Well, I think Richard put his finger on it, right? The new airplanes are, from the new manufacturers, are not particularly innovative, but they're in the fastest growing market, so the real competition. They're the current ones. What they do the second time around, especially if they have different economics than a US company driven by market value is constrained to, we'll see. That's what makes the future interesting.
So, Philippe, shifting gears for a moment, coming back a little bit to the theme of fuel. One question that's always fun is turboprop, turbojet, resurgence, temporary, permanent. Could you comment on the U.S. Airline market and what you see there?
Yeah, so we've always been strong believers that there's room for both. And it goes back to the comment I made originally, which was the airlines are going to seek to optimize their networks. And in order to optimize your network, you need to be able to serve communities that are close into your hubs and communities that are further away. The turboprop clearly has an economic benefit on 500-mile sectors or less. High cycle operation, little time in cruise, not a lot of time for the productivity of the jet to come into play. The fuel price and the expectation of fuel price, what that does is it shifts that point of equivalency of operating a turboprop and a jet to the right. It makes that range further out. We've seen that in the last decade. If you look at simply the sales of regional aircraft, I think at the beginning, the first 5 years of the last decade, it was 80 to 85% jet sales and less than 20% turboprop sales. The last 5 years, once we saw the fuel price edge up to $40, $50 a barrel, and then in 2008 when we saw the spike, turboprops in fact outsold regional jets, almost 55% to 45%. So the airlines are doing very rational things. They're buying turboprops to fly on the routes that turboprops make sense on. In the US market, there was a big movement to go all jet. It was, to some extent, a marketing activity based around the fact that you had $20 barrel fuel. Well, those same airlines are coming back today, and through a merger, we now have Q400s operating at United, and they're actually taking out some of the regional jets that they put in and replacing them with turboprops. The turboprops that are available today are just as capable when it comes to the avionics in the cockpit. They're just as comfortable when it comes to the cabin. In fact, we've standardized our cabin on the next-gen CRJ and the Q400, same features available in both. And so for the airline, being able to offer that seamless service, whether it's an aircraft with a jet engine or a turboprop engine, is a big attribute and value in their network. Now, if we look at our forecast going forward, whether it's North America or mature market like Europe, we see about 40% of the deliveries in the less than 100-seat segment going the way of turboprops. And in the US alone, if you were to take out the sectors flown by regional jets today, where we would say you're almost abusing the regional jet for flying it on 45 to 50-minute sectors, today you could have 200 units of large, efficient turboprop go in and replace those 50-seat jets. Roughly the same operating costs, but you have 25 more seats to sell. So those kinds of value propositions, I think, will ensure that the turboprop has a sustained place even in the US.
Okay. Shifting to financing for a moment, Richard, we had some debate, some fun debate over the last several months about financing and the role of the Export-Import Bank and Emirates and Lufthansa and Delta and so forth. Is this debate and any change in some of these rules on aircraft financing, are they structural changes to how airplanes get financed and growth, or is it more of a temporary phenomenon?
Well, it's very interesting. I think these changes are, well, if they'd happened a year ago, I think they could have been potentially ruinous for some people. You look at the rise of export credit finance, both EXIM over in the US and the ECAs over in Europe. They grew from about 15% of transactions back before crisis to about a third in the heart of the crisis. And I think it was only the whole home market issue that kept them from going further. Now, one thing that really characterized this downturn, one thing that distinguished it from all the other downturns, was the near collapse in commercial credit. That really sort of changed the game. And Airbus and Boeing had no huge interest in ramping up their own manufacturer finance and putting risk on their books. I think they'd probably learned their lesson from previous times. So a lot fell on these government agencies. And of course, you get a kind of structural unfairness that builds into the system because you can finance jets that go to your competitors who are stealing traffic from your home-based majors, be they based in the Middle East or Asia or wherever. Whereas if you're United or Air France, you can't get this because it's the home market rule, and obviously you can't get EXIM or ECA. Getting rid of it now or lowering the terms, I don't think it's all of that big a risk, just because it looks like there's a lot more commercial credit flooding back into this industry. As a matter of fact, it looks like it's everybody's favorite investment because there are a few other really good investment opportunities out there in the economy. I think that's having an impact on everything. But it is going to be interesting. If there is another downturn in commercial credit and jetliner finance, and the OEMs aren't willing to ramp up, and I really don't think that they will, it's going to be quite a temptation for EXIM and ECA to renegotiate and reduce costs for the borrowers of export clients yet again.
Tell me about, speaking of financing and business models for acquiring airplanes, is it an accurate observation to say we've had a resurgence of the lessor, and to what extent are lessors having an influence now on the OEMs versus the traditional aircraft operators?
I think this is really big. You look at the orders last year, about a third of them or so came from lessors. And I understand why there's a lot of private capital flooding into this business. You look at, what was it Tim Geithner said about demand for U.S. government debt? There's excessive demand for safe investments. And when it comes to a liquid asset that has an historically pretty good return experience for a lot of people, narrow-body jets, 737s and A320s, which is where all of these orders went, are a really good investment. Even if you flood the market, you're still getting better return on investment than pretty much anybody else out there is offering you. The problem is that, of course, if you're a lessor who's taken delivery of an awful lot of current generation jets, the last thing you want to see is the value of your portfolio crunched by the arrival of new technology. That's exactly what happened to the 737 Classics, the older A320s, the older MD-80s, all of the MD-80s, let's face it. All of them, to a certain extent, were prematurely obsoleted by the flood of narrow bodies that came into the market over the past decade, the decade of the narrow body, as you say, enabled by all of this financing. Now, I think they look at new products powered by geared turbofan and LEAP-X, and they think, wow, numbers are exactly the same. If these things come in and get built in huge quantity, that's going to do to our investment portfolios exactly what our investment portfolios did to the earlier model jets. We really don't want that. Please don't do anything new ever again. So you've got this sort of deeply entrenched conservatism on the basis of perfectly rational economic fear that's countering the good efforts of people who are offering, Allen's compound interest and or the radical change offered by the new fuel-efficient engines. It's a very conservative force.
So Jerry, at Boeing, how vocal are the lessors in the halls of Boeing, and how do they influence you these days?
What Richard's spot on. I mean, we literally get them coming in saying things like that. Don't change the airplane, or the lessors are now part of our design process. So when we think about new airplanes, because they're such an important stakeholder, we're actually looking at design characteristics. They want things like commonality. They want high market penetration. They hate niche airplanes because they're risky to them. They hate things that will obsolete existing fleets of airplanes. We'll have to get over that one, but we are thinking about how do we design airplanes that work well with the lessors, because they are the owners of a huge amount of the fleet out there.
Alan, who, in terms of airframe and engine design, who is more influential, or who will be more influential in this decade? I'll give you 4 choices. The US customer, the non-US customer, the airlines in these cases, the US regulator, or the non-US regulator?
It's like asking me, do I want to be hung, shot, or electrocuted?
or none of the above, or all the above?
One change we've seen in aviation is in the good old days, America led the world, and there was an intense rivalry. Buy a Boeing airplane, you could buy a Douglas airplane. Nobody else was on the horizon. The FAA set the standards for the world aviation in terms of operability, in terms of certification, in terms of safety. Now we see a much more assertive Europe. And no one asked the earlier panel what they thought of paying European fuel taxes, carbon taxes, as they fly in and out of Europe, and there's international lawsuits about it. So the world is changing, and some of these constraints, just as we see now antitrust law constraints against large US companies from Europe, preventing US mergers, I think you may see the same thing in aviation. And if fuel gets really expensive, whatever that means, then niche airplanes start to look very efficient. And so, for example, Lufthansa has been vocal about wanting a 1,500 nautical mile airplane, which would indeed, as a narrow body, which would serve Europe very well. Of course, it doesn't get you from New York to Los Angeles, and so it's not a US airplane. So lessors don't want that kind of airplane at all. And I think that the large manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus that want a broad market and build very sophisticated, refined airplanes for billions of dollars of capital, that's not an attractive market. But new players who may have much lower cost structure, who may be much more willing to make boutique products, could change the game. And I don't see them coming into the US initially, but then I don't think people thought the regional jets would have much effect here, and they changed all of US aviation.
I think we have a few minutes left. Should we go to some questions from the audience? None yet? Any of the, well, folks are thinking, any of the other panelists want to tackle that? Raise your hand to tackle that last question, opine on who the most influential are in design these days, the regulator or the customer?
You know, I would say all the above. Alan was spot on the answer. The marketer answer would be that, you know, we have different market segments, regionally, different business model with our customers, with the airlines, leasing companies, and we want to make sure we capture all those voice of the customer. And it's at the end of the day, it's all about trade-off. And the example that Alan gave is a perfect example. One particular airlines, one very influential airlines, you know, wanting 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 nautical miles, and some others, you know, wanting a transcon US capability for single aisle, for example. And you have to combine that with what the leasing company wants, and usually they want an airplane that can be placed in a lot of different places. So as a marketer, you really have to spend a lot of time in segmenting the market and being able to do those trade-offs and making sure that you get at the end a product with the top product objectives that kind of fit the best into the picture.
Do we have any more from the audience now? Let me just add, oh, there's one over here, I believe. No? Okay, one last question then from me. We didn't give too much attention to freighters or all cargo, but do we see an increased demand in that sector? And if so, what part of the world is driving that most? Maybe let's start with Jerry and go to Richard.
We are seeing very robust growth in cargo. The last 2 years saw an unprecedented decline. Many were predicting it would be 2012 before they recovered, and what we're actually seeing at the year end, they're back up to peak, and we're anticipating significant growth. A lot of the growth is where you would expect. A lot of Asia traffic around the world, a lot of products, and at least for a while, it looks pretty solid.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The numbers are sort of etched into my brain. I remember fourth quarter 08, first quarter of 09. I think we hit a low year over year of a 23% decline in ATKs, or FTKs, sorry. Those are the sort of numbers you associate with either a nuclear war or a space alien invasion, you know. It's like, that's not good. And yeah, there were a lot of people saying, yeah, exactly that, you know, this isn't coming back. And yet, I think it was, good Lord, sometime in 2010, we hit a record of 34% year over year growth, just an incredible recovery. So you look at this, the mad mood swings, it's pretty clear that this is an industry that perhaps is a bit more cyclical than passenger traffic, but boy, is it really strong right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a very positive note to end on. I want to compliment the panel for not only answering in a very forthcoming fashion every question I could think of, but apparently every question the audience could possibly think of as well. So give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.